Good morning. It's already been very encouraging to be with all of you. That's on, all right. And it's good for my whole family to be here. Thank you for making the accommodations to make that possible. One of the things that my wife and I, Samantha, very deeply want to give to our children is what we didn't have growing up. And that's a Christian kind of background and learning things about the Bible. And so all of you who are involved in the VBS here and teaching and being involved in those kids' classes, I thank you just personally for the investment that you're making in our four kids in the time that we're here. It's good to connect with Caleb and Kira again. I spent a lot of time with Caleb when he was in Bowling Green. Grew to be very fond of Caleb, and everybody loves Kira. If you don't like Kira, you're the problem. And so it's encouraging to see the work that they're doing here. Caleb speaks very highly of all of you. And so if you guys are paying him to say that, he's doing his job. But I don't think that's the case. You guys seem like a group of very sincere people that love the Lord and want to do what's right and are engaged in the things of the Lord. The first session that we looked at for the Bible class portion was to frame what we're looking at on comparing objective evidences for the faith, the traditional apologetic kind of lessons, as opposed to or in conjunction with subjective evidences, that all of us have deep needs within our own hearts and lives that God has his ways of meeting. And I believe in a society that has become less and less objectively focused on things, we need to have another tool in our tool bag to know how to talk to people about the Lord. And one of the things that we can do is by, like what Jesus would do, especially in the Gospel of John, where he would say things like this: if anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. We all have these deep thirsts and longings for community and love and hope and meaning. And Jesus is the way that we get those things met. But anybody who's not serving Jesus, if the Bible is true, if you're serving anything other than Jesus, you're serving a hireling that's going to kill and steal and destroy. And so one of the deep needs that we have as human beings is our need for meaning. Now, Viktor Frankl was a World War II person in a concentration camp. He was a Jewish psychoanalyst that was imprisoned in a concentration camp. And he went on to continue to psychoanalyze people while they were in the concentration camps. And he's written some books about these things. And he developed something called logotherapy, which is the therapy of giving people meaning in life. And his idea was that as long as people had meaning in life, they could even endure deep suffering like what a concentration camp would give you. Look what he says here. Logotherapy regards its assignment as that of assisting the patient to find meaning in his life. All of us need to have meaning. And a guy who lived through a concentration camp believed that as long as people had a sense of meaning in life, it would give them more strength during something even as terrible as that. What does it mean to have meaning in your life? I think fundamentally it means to look backward on your origins and to be able to answer the question, why am I here? What's the purpose of my living? What are the things that I'm supposed to be doing day in and day out that has some kind of a lasting impact that's going to go some into hope, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. But atheists, Christians, everybody would acknowledge that we need to have a sense of meaning. And so let's start out with this question. What is the secular approach to meaning? If somebody wants to disentangle themselves from God and say that I don't need God in my life and I'm going to try to find meaning in my life without God, how would they do this? And everything that I'm about to show you is what I show atheists when I study with them, or people that are struggling with their faith or starting to deconstruct their faith. These are the same quotes that I show these people in these discussions. And I think that they're also very helpful for us as Christians to think about. But let me show you this quote from this atheist named Fabian Suchanek. And he says, "The purpose of life must be the intention that the creator of life pursued with his creation. Now, unfortunately, there is no such creator in the atheist worldview. Thus, the notion of purpose of life in the sense of the intention of the creator is undefined in the atheist world. For atheists, there is no God-given purpose of life. you've ever talked with skeptics and atheists, they would say, yes, I agree with that. There is no meaning that's been assigned to me by something outside of me. There is no objective meaning to living in this world. But they'll be quick to say, that doesn't mean, though, that we don't try to find meaning. We can create our own meaning. So this quote from Dr. Adam Rutherford is, I guess he's a pretty popular podcaster from Great Britain. You'll see that with the spelling of this. But he says this: a meaningless universe does not mean we live our lives without purpose. I'm an atheist, but I try to live my life replete with purpose. Be kind, learn and discover as much as you can, share that knowledge, relieve suffering when you can, have tons of fun. But they say tones in Great Britain, I guess, or that's just how they spell it. That's why it's not pointless. We have the power to create life and to show those lives wonder. Surely that's enough. It is for me. So far, these two quotes, whenever I've shown this to skeptics, they go, I totally agree with that. There's no objective meaning to life. I accept that. And that's not a problem for me. Because of what people like Adam Rutherford say, I get to create my own meaning in life, which actually feels more freeing. And so I like to, who doesn't like to be kind? Don't you like to be kind? You ever gone through Starbucks, and because of inflation, it's no longer $5, but it's like $13 or something? And the person in front of you pays for your drink, and it's just like, you just do really nice things for people. It just feels good, to be kind to people, because the world has so many non-kind people in it. Don't you like to learn and discover and share? I mean, isn't it cool to listen to podcasts and listen to videos on the YouTubes and learn all kinds of new things? And then be able to go and tell people, hey, check out this cool stuff that I learned. That's really cool, isn't it? And then relieving suffering. Who doesn't like to relieve suffering? I mean, that's really cool to be part of that. And then finally, having tones of fun. Is it just me, or don't you guys like to have tones of fun too? I like to have tones of fun. And so that's good enough for me. Now, just ask yourself before we start to deconstruct what's wrong with this secular approach to meaning. Ask yourself this question: if you're a Christian serving God, and God is allegedly your meaning in life, how much do you relate to what Adam Rutherford says here? God's not the core of this. God's not the center of this, but how many of us are living like this is your sense of meaning in life? Let's go ahead and start to deconstruct. What are some of the issues with this? Because all the skeptics I've shown this, they especially like this second quote. That's right, we get to create our own meaning. So what are the weaknesses to this approach of trying to find meaning in life without God? Let me say, first of all, this one, that this approach to meaning in life cannot apply to everybody. And the way that we could bring this up is, let me say it this way. If your worldview doesn't fit everybody in the world, it's a bad worldview. Because think about this question. Can everybody learn and discover and share? Does everybody get to do that? Can everybody relieve other people's suffering? And can everybody have tones of fun? I think I've worn that joke out. I'm done with that now. But I trained in Brentwood with Barry Kircheville at the church there. And one of the stories that Barry had told me one time was that he went to India. And there was a guy that had no arms and no legs. And people would carry this guy out to a street corner and then open up a coat for him, and people would drop money. Imagine that you are an enlightened skeptic in India, and you go up to this guy and you say, hey, like, I heard that you're religious. I just want you to understand something, that your meaning in life is found by learning and discovering and sharing things. And I think you need to start doing that. And I think you should try to relieve suffering as much as you can. And I think you need to have tons of fun in life. If your worldview only applies to people in privileged countries, you have a bad worldview. If your worldview cannot apply to everybody, no matter their skin color, no matter how much money they have, no matter how much education they have, whatever, then it's a bad worldview. And so that's the first problem with this. But there's a second problem with this worldview, is that not only does it not apply to everybody in the world, is that it would be very vexing to think about. Can you imagine every day trying to find your meaning in life based on things like this? And then you go to bed at night, and you're trying to go to bed, and you start thinking, what is left after I die? For deeper thinkers, for people who like to think of themselves as sophisticated, deep thinkers, there's going to come this nagging thought that if this is all there is, what's really the point of having all this fun that I'm having and even relieving suffering? This is a quote from Leo Tolstoy, and I'll take that off for a second. Leo Tolstoy was a Russian author in the 1800s, and he wrote War and Peace, very famous guy. And he was a healthy man, he had a good family, he was very famous. He's what everybody wishes that they could have been. But he wrote a short religious book called Confessions. And look what, in this book on Confessions, it's his nagging thoughts that led him to some form of believing in the Bible. I don't know what he taught about how to be saved. I don't know any of that kind of stuff. But at least brought him to a belief in the Bible. And look what he says in this quote here. I could give no reasonable meaning to any single action or to my whole life. Sooner or later, my affairs, whatever they may be, will be forgotten, and I shall not exist. Then why go on making any effort? How can man fail to see this? And how go on living? That is what is surprising. One can only live while one is intoxicated with life. As soon as one is sober, it is impossible not to see that it is all a mere fraud and a stupid fraud. That is precisely what it is. There is nothing either amusing or witty about it. It is simply cruel and stupid. Notice Leo Tolstoy's frustration. I don't care if I'm making a garden in my backyard. I don't care if I'm going to write the next book that's going to be world famous. I don't understand why I should go on making any of these efforts because there's no single thing that I do that seems to have any lasting impact, and it's all just a fraud. He talks in this quote about living while one is intoxicated with life. You know, for a time, I could keep on living as long as I was living like an intoxicated person. What does he mean by that? He doesn't mean by this literally getting drunk. Instead, what he means by this is, as long as I think in a shallow way, then I can kind of forget that there's no ultimate meaning in life, even if I'm a really famous person. I can kind of forget about that as long as I think like a shallow person would think. Have you ever thought about the word amusement? What does it mean to muse? M-U-S-E, to think deeply. What does it mean to amuse yourself? There's a book written that's titled Amusing Ourselves to Death, written in the 80s about TV and what it's doing to people. To amuse means that you're not thinking about anything deeply. How many of us amuse ourselves to death by scrolling on our phones, and here's a video of a cat doing this, and here's an AI video of dogs doing flips off of a diving board, and look at that. Was it real? Was it not real? I think it was fake. And you're just looking at all these things one after another, and you're just amusing yourself and not thinking about the things that matter the most. But for deep thinkers, and the moments when you are thinking deeper, if you're not serving God, you know that there's no ultimate point to anything that you're doing. Now, what's the advice that atheists will give to other advice about this? Imagine you're an atheist talking to another atheist, and you go, hey, how do you deal with it when you think deeply about what's going to be left after we die and how there's really no point to anything? You go, okay, well, here comes another atheist named Will Storr, and here's his advice. We know how this ends. You're going to die, and so will everyone you love. Human life and all its noise and hubris will be rendered meaninglessness for eternity. The cure for the horror is story. Our brains distract us from this terrible truth by filling our lives with hopeful goals and encouraging us to strive for them. It gives our existence the illusion of meaning and turns our gaze from the dread. Isn't it ironic that skeptics oftentimes like to paint themselves as we're the deep thinkers, we're the rational ones? But yet you have to give yourself the illusion of meaning because you know that there is no ultimate meaning. So the best you have is the illusion. Amusement, social media, stories in books or movies, all of this is thinking like a drunk person, not thinking about the questions that matter the most. In fact, you remember Viktor Frankl, the Jewish psychoanalyst? Do you know what he said about the use of drugs? And you could couple things like that with alcohol, drug, all that, hallucinogenics even. Look what Viktor Frankl said about this. The drug scene is one aspect of a more general mass phenomenon, namely the feeling of meaninglessness resulting from a frustration of our existential needs. Why do people use drugs? Why do people dull themselves constantly? One of the answers to that, there's multiple answers to that, but one of the answers that Viktor Frankl proposed is that people know they don't have a sense of meaning in life, and so as long as I can dull myself and not have to think about the deeper questions, then I'll go on in life and be okay with that. By the way, do you know what the Greek word for sorcery is in the New Testament? The Greek word for sorcery in the New Testament is pharmakeia, pharmacy. The pushing of illicit drugs. You know, why was it that people would use drugs in the ancient Roman Empire? I need peace. I need to have a sense of serenity. I need to have these things. And yes, what you want are good things. But the way you're trying to fulfill them is the wrong way. God has His ways of actually giving you meaning in life. Quit dulling yourself and look to Him for purpose. So far, do you see the weakness of the secular approach? If you're a deeper thinker, in the moments you think deeply, you'll be frustrated that there's no meaning in life. Your worldview can't apply to everybody. And there's one other problem, and that other problem is that eventually suffering will come in your life. Even if you just learn to think like an intoxicated person all the time, suffering will come, and it will strip you away of your meaning, because if your meaning is built on the things of this life, things in this life will take you away from it. There is an atheist named Bertrand Russell, and he said this in his most famous essay. For the young, there is nothing unattainable. A good thing desired with the whole force of a passionate will, and yet impossible, is to them not credible. Yet by death, by illness, by poverty, or by the voice of duty, we must learn, each one of us, that the world was not made for us, and that however beautiful may be the things we crave, fate may nevertheless forbid them. What's the belief of young people, according to this guy? You talk to a young person, 18, 19 years old, that's going off to college, and you go, hey, if you work hard enough, and you do the right things, there's nothing you can't accomplish. Bertrand Russell says that that's not the way that this works. That there are trials, death, poverty, all these things that he mentions here, all of these things start to burst the bubble of young people. Let's just think about the things that he mentions here. How about the first one being death? This might be your death. It could be the death of a loved one. So let's say that my meaning in life was my family, my wife and my 4 kids. By the way, it's my wife's birthday tomorrow. She'll be 33. And so what I'm giving her for a birthday gift is she gets to hear me preach tomorrow, which is her favorite thing. And so, let's say that my meaning in life is my family, though. Is it good to have a good family and to derive some sense of meaning from? Sure, it is. But what if my wife and 4 kids all died in one car accident at the same time? What's happened to my meaning in life? It has been stripped from me. What about illness? Let me just tell you one story. When I was in Minnesota, and I was preaching at this little church in Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic was. That's when I was getting my degree, as I was preaching for them. And while I was there was an institutional church across town that we were trying to figure out how to possibly combine. And there was this older guy there that he knew his Bible pretty well. We had some disagreements about things. But he gave me this piece of advice that I haven't forgotten since. And he came up to me. Now, keep in mind, these are his words and not mine. So he comes up to me and he says, hey, Eric, do you want to know why there's so many old, cranky people in the world? And yeah, I want to know because I don't want to be that guy. And he said, the reason that there are so many old, cranky people, and he was alluding to Ecclesiastes 11 and 12, he said that there's a lot of people that didn't remember their Creator in the days of their youth. So when they were younger, skiing was their God, music was their God, sports was their God. And then they start to get older, and then they can't hear music like they used to. They get arthritis, and they can't play the guitar like they used to. They can't do all the things that they used to be able to do. And so their God was stripped away from them because of illness. And now they're left old and cranky and bitter because all their favorite things have been taken away from them. You ever seen that happen to somebody? What about poverty? People could dig up something that you shouldn't have said on social media 30 years ago and then just fire you because of it. What about the voice of duty? You know how many young people I've known that want to be content creators, and I want to have a YouTube channel, and I want to start a podcast and make a bunch of money. Okay, cool, very good. Eventually, you have bills to pay, and you're not getting there. The voice of duty sometimes tells people that life is not everything that I wanted it to be, but suffering is going to come to everybody because this is the world that we live in. So what are the weaknesses of this, I get to create my own meaning in life? It can't apply to everyone. And so if you have this as your meaning in life, I get to create my own meaning, and I like to have fun and all these things. You have an arrogant worldview because most people in the world cannot do the things that your worldview says should be done. It's vexing to think about for those who are deeper thinkers, and then suffering will eventually come and remove it all from you. Now, at this point, if you're sharing this with a skeptic and they're being honest with themselves, what's starting to happen? They're starting to realize that they're impoverished, that they are following the hireling that's stealing and killing and destroying them. So we would want to replace that with the biblical approach to meaning. What is the biblical approach to having meaning in life? And just a few quick things on this. The first thing is what the Bible says in the beginning, that we are created in the image of God. This is the first thing that the Bible says about human beings, is that you're made in God's image. What does it mean to be made in God's image? Let me start to unravel how we can answer that question. I want to show you another passage in the Old Testament that uses that same Hebrew word for image. And think about this and what this might start to say about what we're talking about. Look at Numbers 33, verse 52. You shall drive out all the inhabitants of the land from before you, and destroy all their figured stones, and destroy all their metal images, and demolish all their high places. So when the Israelites are going to go into the land of promise, and they're supposed to destroy the idols and the false gods and the temples that shouldn't belong on the earth, it says that they're going to destroy their metal images. Same Hebrew word. So in those temples, there would be images of the false gods. In the beginning of the Bible, God creates the cosmic temple, which is the earth, and then he sets up his images in them, which are human beings. If you were to ask somebody, all right, if we were to go around the room and say, if you were going to violate one of the 10 commandments, and this is just a thought experiment, let's go ahead and just say that we're going to break one of the 10 commandments about not making any graven images of God. And we started going around the room, what animal would you choose to represent God or to be an image of God? And then, the lion. Oh, yeah, because it's ferocious and strong. And then somebody else goes, yeah, but that's not very gentle, so I want to do a lamb. And then Billy, because he always wants to be weird, says, I would say an octopus. And you're like, I don't know why he said that. And so there's all these different ways people might picture this. But what's the problem with reducing God down to a stone lion or a stone octopus? Is that image can't live and breathe and move and react to things in the world. Of all the things God made that can be an image of him, it's you. It doesn't matter what skin color you are. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter what state or country you're from. None of that matters. Every human being has been dignified with the capacity to reflect God into the world, and nothing else can do that. Do you know, then, the way that human beings tap into their meaning in life is you have to know God. You have to draw near to him. You have to understand who he is. Your meaning in life is going to be enhanced the more you come to know who he is. One of the most important questions you can be asking when you're reading your Bible is asking the question, what does this teach me about God? God is loving. God has wrath and he has anger. There's certain things that we don't get to imitate, like his wrath. But all the things that we can imitate, are we learning more about him so then we know how to be a better image of God in reflection to him in the world? That's the first thing to say about the biblical approach to meaning in life, is that everybody's made to be images of God so that when people look at you, they think of God. When you see the swoosh sign on a shoe, what do you think of? Nike. When people see you, what do they think of? NASCAR. You're doing it wrong. You just be doing it wrong then. It's got to be God. That's why we were created. Here's the second thing to say about the biblical approach, is that suffering doesn't remove our meaning in life. If we're made to be images of God, no amount of suffering can remove that from us. And I think about 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, where Peter, referring to the salvation that we have, he says, "In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ." What's the audience of 1 Peter going through? They've been scattered in the first couple verses of the book. They've been scattered from their homeland. And they're going through various trials, economic problems. If you read through 1 Peter, have you noticed what the primary kind of suffering the audience is going through? It's verbal. When people speak against you as evildoers, when people revile you, when people slander you. There's people that have marriage issues in 1 Peter chapter 3, women that are married to non-Christian husbands. And Peter's quick to say in verse 6 that you are grieved by these trials. The Bible accepts and acknowledges that if you're a Christian, you can have real grief, the tears can be real, the pain is real. Have you ever had a time before where you were going through something difficult and you told a Christian and they said, "Well, every day you should just be smiling because you're a Christian"? Are you sure about that? You can have grief and joy at the same time. Those two things coexist. And so the Bible's not saying that grief isn't real, but it is saying that your faith can be tested and made stronger through the trial, which is going to make you more into the image of the one who created you. Imagine for a moment that you had a piece of gold that could talk. And you talk to this little piece of gold, let's say it's the clicketizer. And you talk to the clicketizer gold thing, and you say, "Hey, do you want to be made pure?" And the little gold thing says, "Yeah, sure do." And you say, "Okay, cool, buddy." And then you put it into the fire, and it goes, "What are you doing to me?" "Well, I'm doing what you wanted, right? Didn't you want to be made more pure?" How is it that we get made more pure? It's going to happen through trials. For the non-Christian, trials is going to remove you from your meaning in life. And for the Christian, we get driven deeper into our meaning in life because it refines us and it takes the dross away. Our suffering works for us and not against us. But notice one other thing. There's one other thing to say about the Christian worldview, and that is that there is a judgment day. In Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14, after the writers tried to find all of these things under the sun, and this last passage here, we can sometimes read this as like this scary, ominous thing, but this, for the writer of Ecclesiastes, is a breath of fresh air. This is the relief he comes to find. And he says in Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." You know what Solomon realized here? Without God and without a final judgment day, nothing I do matters. But with God and with a final judgment, where he'll even bring every secret thing into judgment, that means that all the things that I do when nobody else is around me and when I'm with other people, everything I do has eternal meaning. Because there is a God that I have to answer to one day for the things that I do. Have you ever thought about the tragedy that would exist if there was no final judgment? Nothing you do matters ultimately, but with final judgment day, everything you do matters. It's a relief to Solomon at the end of this book that he realizes that. And do you know what happens in the New Testament? What the New Testament teaches will happen when this judgment day comes? If our mission in life, if our meaning in life is to be an image of God and reflect him to the world, which means I'm getting to know him and my sufferings drive me deeper into that, do you know what's going to happen on final judgment day? According to 1 John chapter 3, verse 2, it says, "Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is." On judgment day, you get to become fully what you were seeking to be in this life. You remember when the Israelites were in the wilderness? What did God drop from heaven? Manna. What did it taste like? Milk and honey, or it tasted like honey, sorry. Where were they on their way? To a land flowing with milk and honey. It was almost as if every day when God would drop this bread down from heaven and they would go and retrieve it and eat it, they were getting a taste of where they were going. Every time you grow deeper into being an image of God, you're getting more of a taste of what's ultimately going to be true about you. You're going to be made to be like Him. Now, you compare the biblical approach to the secular approach. We're created to be imagers of God. Suffering drives us deeper into our meaning, and Judgment Day makes everything that we do matter. You contrast the two worldviews. We all know that we need meaning in life. Which worldview most adequately satisfies what you know that you need? And which worldview are you living under? The good shepherd or the hireling that will steal and kill and destroy you? We're about to sing a song. If there's anybody here that is subject to the invitation or needs encouragement, the opportunity stands for us to do that. You can talk to somebody before we leave, or if you have some kind of urgent need, you can come forward and one of the men of the congregation will assist you. And if anybody is subject to that, please come forward while we stand.